I want to talk to you about what is the most misunderstood belief in the Bible. When we misunderstand something, it can cause all kinds of difficulties. And this is a belief that many people think they understand, but in reality they don't. I'm talking to you about faith. We really do misunderstand faith because what we think of faith as is having a strong enough belief that we can make something become true. And there are Bible verses that seem to indicate that that's true. Jesus says, if you have faith, you can move mountains. The boy's father comes to Jesus when his boy is sick and says, if you can, please do something for him. And Jesus says, if I can, to those who believe, everything's possible. And then there's that verse in James that says that if we ask, we must ask believing without any doubts at all. See, all those are verses that seem to indicate that if we can just conjure up enough will to believe something strong enough, that it's going to happen. But in fact, when you take a look at those verses, that's not what's being taught. Faith isn't having to try and conjure up enough belief so you can remove any kind of doubt at all so that you can have something happen, whatever it is that you're asking God for. Rather, faith has to do with a person and what we believe about that person. Take that verse in James, for example. When we ask, we're to ask believing, and then it says without any doubts. But when you look at the context, you can understand what he means by doubts. The context doesn't have to do with the strength of our faith. It has to do with a supreme allegiance and not having multiple allegiances in your life. And the person who shouldn't expect to receive anything is a person who's playing a game with God where God's kind of important to them, but really has all these other allegiances in their life, and God isn't really their God. You can see how that would play out. So the Bible points us rather than to the trying to conjure up enough belief in us so that we don't have any doubts. The Bible points to what we believe about Jesus, and because of what we believe about Jesus, to trust in him. Therefore, you'll see Jesus in Mark chapter 4, for example. The disciples and Jesus are crossing a lake, and Jesus is tired because he's done all kinds of things. He's tired, and so he falls asleep. Now, the disciples are experienced fishermen. They've gone through all kinds of weather. But the wind and the waves really get severe, and they're so strong, they're afraid the boat's going to capsize and that they might drown. And they look at Jesus, who throughout all this somehow is incredibly sleeping, and they say to him, Master, don't you care that we might die? Jesus wakes up, sees what's going on, stands up, looks at the wind and the waves, and he says to them, be still, be quiet. And immediately they're quiet. And the disciples look at him and they say, who is this? Who's this person who could be so tired that he sleeps, and yet even the wind and the waves obey him? You see, it has to do with what they believe about the person. Jesus says, O ye of little faith. What is he reprimanding them for? For not having a strong enough faith that if they just didn't have any doubts, they could be able to say to the wind and the waves themselves, be quiet, and they'd be quiet? No, that's not what he's saying. He's saying to them, if you really knew who I was, if you really believed in who I was, if you knew that I was involved in the creation of the universe, that the wind and the waves have their very existence depend on me, if you knew that I cared for you and loved you, created you, that you're mine, if you knew who I was, you knew what I was about, then the wind and the waves wouldn't bother you. You'd respond differently because you trusted in me. And that's what Jesus is trying to point to. That's what the Bible's trying to point us to. It's trying to point us to the character and purpose of God and to being able to rest and trust in him. And the difference is this. If we believe that faith is about conjuring up enough beliefs so that we don't have any doubts, we're looking to our ability to believe. And then it's about simply manipulating God to accomplish our agenda. If we have enough faith, then what we want to have happen, God's going to do it. But that's not what it is. Rather than being something, a tool, if you will, that we manipulate God by to accomplish our agenda, faith calls us to a person and to surrender to that person so that we are seeking not our agenda, but his agenda. Those differences are huge. And when we see it's about the surrender to a person who's in charge of life, who is sovereign over all, who loves us, who cares for us, who's given his life for us, who's good and wants good things for us, when we see that it's about knowing Him, growing in knowing Him, and learning to trust Him because we know Him, because of what we believe about Him, then it's going to change dramatically the way that we respond to life and the way that we respond to people.